And welcome back to another special edition of the Michael Decon program, reporting to you live and direct, all the way from the wastelands of California. Deep inside a boiler room, my name in fact is Michael. I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. First time listeners out there, thank you for finding us. This show is better than a fatal accident. I do hope you enjoy your stay. Joining me tonight is Mr. James Perloff. He is the author of the book COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come. Red-pilled. Since his last appearance on the program, his book was banned on Amazon. He has returned to give us an update. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing us into your hearts and into your minds. Here we are again. On a night like this, abracadabra, we become prophets every day. I hope this message finds you, those who may need it. Great to see you out there, those of you in the chat room. Yes, it does feel good to be back again, friends and foes. What a time to be alive, and of course we survived this year in one piece, I hope. I know a number of you out there have contracted COVID-19. And you have recovered. Thanks for letting me know you're alive and well. Keep in mind, you too can get involved. That number is 424-666-2425. Let your voice be heard. We would love to hear from you out there, especially since, these are the end times after all. Now, without further ado, let's bring in Mr. Perloff, who is waiting patiently right now. And yes, welcome back, James. How are you?
I'm doing good, Michael. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad you are here. It's pretty much the end of the world as we know it. And of course, it's the end of the year. So, James, I'm so glad you're back. It's time for us to talk once again. And the last time you were here was just a few months ago, but I felt it was only appropriate to bring you back on before the year did end.
Yeah, there's a meme where you see 2020 coming in as a big wave, and then behind it, there's an even bigger wave called 2021.
Right.
I know everybody's eager for 2020 to be over with, but I don't think anybody who's in the know really expects 2021 to be better.
Yes, I don't think anyone expects 2021 to be any better than what we are currently facing right now. It's only going to get worse, James.
Yeah, actually, 2019 was pretty good. We didn't have the lockdown. We weren't wearing masks. There was no talk of vaccines, and life was still as aberrant as life has become in America over the last few decades. We weren't in this dystopian Orwellian world that we find ourselves in now.
Very true. And of course, since the last time we talked, anyone contract COVID-19 in your family or your friends?
Oh, my family? No,
Everyone's
nobody's,
good.
nobody at all, and um, not concerned. But because we don't know exactly what they're doing, we don't know if they're maybe releasing or planning to release a new bioweapon that they'll say is a variation of COVID. I won't say that. No, I'm not concerned that no one will ever be affected, but nobody in my immediate hemisphere has been had a problem with COVID.
Well, that's a good thing.
How about yourself?
I do have an uncle who did contract the virus, but he's doing all right, I believe. But I do know other listeners out there did contract the virus, and they too are doing all right. Thank God.
Yeah, it seemed especially harsh at the early onset of around March. There definitely were some people who were dying. and I'm in Massachusetts, in Littleton, Mass. There were two people who were sick with it, and then the first responders came, and the first responders got contracted and died. That was an unusual scenario, but yeah, there are a number of cases. Were a number of cases early on, where some people, a few of them young, were seriously feeling ill. But it seems like to whatever extent this is an actual, virus, and there's a lot of debate about what COVID really constitutes. Normally a coronavirus, it goes through herd immunity and it basically disappears, and that's what should have happened with COVID. But we're looking at a very manipulated situation here.
Yeah, this is no standard virus whatsoever, obviously.
Right. I saw a very interesting talk today. I'd seen this gentleman once before, but I hadn't seen him talk about COVID. It's on BitChute, and the talk is by Larry Pavlesky, and let me just make sure I'm saying that right.
No worries.
Yeah, that's Palevsky, Palevsky. He's a 30-year pediatrician, and he says it's a very good interview. It lasts for over an hour, so I use the playback speed a little higher to get through it quicker. But he made so many great points. He said that talked about how in his early days, how when he was like an intern, they'd make rounds and they'd look critically at each patient and what could be the explanation of this diagnosis. He says it's all changed now, and he says in the pediatric world, he says it's almost dead now, that every cough and cold is just immediately branded COVID.
Right.
But he had some interesting remarks about COVID itself. He spoke about the fact that and I have a book on COVID. We'll get into that, and
Yes.
I addressed a lot of the theories there. But he added some insights I hadn't heard before. He mentioned that what he's seen of COVID, it has none of the classic signs of a respiratory disease. You don't see people with a wet cough. You see a dry cough, but not a wet one. So people aren't expelling mucus, and their oxygen levels are low, but they're talking to you and they're breathing just fine. And he went down the list of symptoms that are typical for this. And he says none of the earmarks of a respiratory disease that he's seen in his 3 decades as a physician. He says it's much more like a blood disorder. And he said that the lack of smell and taste, that's more consistent with a blood disorder, is that's failure of zinc to be getting into the tissues, so that it's essential for that. And so he has a very good take on it. And he said that he's also one of the doctors that is now, like Andrew Kaufman and Thomas Cowan, is challenging this virology explanation of COVID. And he seemed to agree with Dr. Andrew Kaufman that these may not be looking at a viral disease, but looking at these exosomes that Kaufman talks about. He pointed out in this video, which the first time I've seen it just today, is very good. He said that they've never actually seen an isolated, pure coronavirus under the electron microscope. They've just seen fragments of it, and they've never actually seen it move. So they've got electron microscope pictures of fragments of the coronavirus near the cell membrane, but they have never actually seen it move. So it's in question whether or not this has entered the cell or exited the cell. And he thinks it's a very good case to be made that actually what people are experiencing with COVID is a toxic phenomena, and their symptoms represent this toxic phenomena. And what they're identifying as COVID under the electron microscope is indeed the removal of waste. I'm not saying that that is a correct interpretation. I don't think he's 100% certain either, but I feel he had some excellent insights into what's going on. But again, many people have made a case for this being a bioweapon. Many people have made a case that it's actually 5G, which could relate to toxins. In fact, one of the things this MDM just referred to mentioned was the possibility that the toxins, it could be of several sorts. It could be a poison of some kind, but it also could be EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. So a lot we still don't understand for sure about COVID, but I do think we've had some excellent insights coming from people like Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Zach Bush and others as to the possible explanations of the nature. But one thing for sure, the lockdowns are far more deadly than COVID itself,
Yes.
at least today.
We'll talk about that in a moment here. And of course, the book is titled COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled. I like the title. By the way, it is banned right now on Amazon, correct?
Yeah, this is a story in itself. I'd been working on a book about 9/11, a very extensive book. I have well over 800 pages of notes that I'd accumulated, and I think I got through about 16 chapters. Pretty long book, right? Rough draft. And then COVID hit, and suddenly I realized, this is more important than 9/11 right now. They're really driving for the New World Order. They're really got their foot on the accelerator. It's not boil the frog any longer. So I dropped everything. I wrote an extensive blog post on COVID in April. And as more and more information started coming out about what was really going on and more information about the suppression of our civil liberties, I kept expanding the post and expanding it. But after a while, I think that made the post a little bit confusing because people would come back and how do you tell what's new and what's old? And I would italicize the new stuff, but it just got to be too long. So I said, I need to come out with a book. I've written several books.
It is difficult, though, to write something like this when the virus is very new. And as you know, the headlines are changing every minute.
Right. That's why I tried in the book to give access to all of the intelligent viewpoints that have come out from red-pilled doctors on this issue. So I decided to write a book in late May, and it took me till I published it in late August, and it was a bestseller on Amazon. It ranked at number 254 of all books on Amazon 2 days after publication. I have to give a tip of the hat to Sean of SGT Report for giving me a short interview, which really gave the book a quick boost. But it stayed at a very high rank on Amazon for 2 months. It sold over 3,500 copies. It was often ranked the #1 bestseller for respiratory diseases. They have no COVID class, but it was the #1 in respiratory diseases. And customers gave it 92% 5 stars, 8% 4 stars, and nobody ever gave it 1, 2, or 3 stars. So it's doing great on Amazon. And then October the 15th, I decided I better make this into an ebook. So I worked flat out for 4 days with a very good ebook conversion company, making this into what I was going to have be a Amazon Kindle book. And the day before I was going to upload it on Amazon Kindle, this is October the 15th, Amazon sent me an email and they said, we have to remove your book from sale because you never specified your rights to this book. This is absolute nonsense. You can't upload a book onto Amazon without specifying your rights, not onto KDP, what you call, KDP is Kindle print on demand. I knew that was not true, but nonetheless, I tried to follow their instructions, but they were blocking me from entering the book on their website. And I finally kind of figured a way to do that. But 2 hours after the first email, I got a second email at a totally separate reason for suppressing the book. Now they said you violated our content guidelines.
Wow.
And so I wrote back and said, what content guidelines? And they only sent me back a generic email saying I violated content guidelines. Now this book, I should mention, has 27 chapters, almost 300 footnotes, and everything I write in this, Michael, is documented. I know that when skeptics hear you criticize the official scenario, the first words out of their mouth are usually, where did you get that information? So the book is documented with almost 300 endnotes. Everything I say, every statistic, every statement is got an endnote.
Yeah, you listed listed your sources in every chapter.
Right. And so I asked Amazon, what did I violate? And they refused to answer. But I was ready for this. I anticipated censorship because, and our audience knows that censorship is at an all-time high, unprecedented in America. So I already, this was a print-on-demand book with Amazon. I already ordered my separate printing, and very thankful I did that because 4 days after the censorship by Amazon, my own printing came in. It's the exact same book, just not an Amazon book now. And so now I turned from writer to publisher, and Amazon had been the distributor for the book. So because they were the distributor, they pulled it so that no longer could Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and other places carry it. However, this is kind of a story of a attack and counterattack. I hired my own mainstream distributor, and I have the book now back in Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Powell's Books.
Good.
And I really got some great news this week because I've heard from people all over the world saying they can't get their book in their own country. The book is now available internationally through Book Depository. It's a UK book distributor, and they ship for free internationally, which is amazing. And I thought, are they even legit? Well, what they do is they raise the price of the book a little bit, and they have a special relationship with Ingram, which is America's top book distributor. I guess they must get books in huge bulk. So they're able to ship internationally for free. So you can now get this book in any country in the world, unless it's some country that has some incredible COVID lockdown and won't let packages come in. So that was really good news this week. So the book is totally available, and I've also turned it into a free ebook, which I've given out countless copies to. But let me stop there before I get into that. I may have given you some grist to talk about.
Oh, no problem. I did enjoy the book. It was a great read, by the way. I have a number of questions to ask you, but first of all, I'm curious to know if there's anything in the book that you have changed your opinion on, or you changed your stance on, rather, since we do have lots of ground to cover in regards to your book here.
No, nothing comes to mind. The people like Dolores Cahill, Judy Mikovits, Rashid Buttar, Dr. Vernon Coleman, names that are quite familiar, I'm sure, to most of your audience. They have not changed their stance, and I've seen no no reason to change the stance. This is still an unjustified lockdown. Now, I have a chapter in the book. It's called 8 Reasons Why We Don't Need a COVID Vaccine. And there's more than that. But the top reason is, even according to the CDC, which uses a very inflated death rates, because as you know, if you die from cancer or heart disease and you happen to test positive for COVID, they count that as a death. According to the CDC, a few months ago, the survival rate for COVID was 99.7%. Now, other doctors, Stanford University, they put it well above that. But if you accept the CDC's survival rate of 99.7%, and according to the CDC, by the way, if you're between the ages of 20 and 49, your chances of surviving COVID are over 99.99%. So why the heck do we need a warp speed vaccine, especially one that has not gone through normal testing protocols? Anybody can just look at this logically. And by the way, I'm a registered nurse. I haven't mentioned that yet in this podcast, but I was a registered nurse for 45 years.
Right.
And I retired last year before COVID hit. So I'm familiar with the fact that you don't quarantine healthy people. And I knew when Andrew Cuomo was sending sick people into nursing homes, that's the exact opposite of what you normally do in a nursing home. You take the sick person out of the nursing home and send them to the hospital. You don't send the sick into nursing homes where the most vulnerable population is.
Right.
But we've seen so many things that there's just a disparity between logic and what the government and the mass media, the CNN and sometimes even Fox, are saying. So no, nothing's really changed. What's rational remains rational, and the government's irrationality on these lockdowns remains the same. They're putting in place the same lockdowns and crushing civil liberties as they were last spring. That turned this into a nonstop event. Just a little let up during the summer months. So yeah, nothing has essentially changed. However, because my book was published by August, which may seem like ancient history in terms of COVID, on my website I have an updates page, and every time a new story breaks that's of significance related to COVID, I add it to that update page, and eventually I may even come up with an updated version of the book. But of course that is a lot of work. That means you have to change your footnote numbers and your index and things like that. So you have to have plenty of new material if you're going to actually update the book. But I do update the book on the website.
Nice. And James, I must ask, when you first heard of the news of this pandemic, what were your initial reactions? Did you think this was legit, or did you think this was all bullshit?
Being a veteran alt media writer who's seen a lot of false flags, I was a little skeptical, but not as much as I became as the information came out and the contradictions in the official story began to accumulate. I have to say that when 9/11 happened,
right,
I was in the throes of a lot of difficult personal issues, a mother who had Alzheimer's and a psychotic neighbor, all kinds of stuff going on.
Yes.
So I was just kind of watching CNN, and I didn't really give it a think through and think in terms of false flag until about a year later, actually. So yeah, I kind of accepted the official narrative on 9/11 until information started coming out. So for me, yeah, there was some skepticism, but it really took confirmation from multiple alt media sources, picking apart the official narrative before I became firmly convinced that this was a false flag. How about yourself, Michael?
Well, I talked to several people about it, and I sort of felt that this was pretty legit, James. Although some of the information which was, coming out at the time, which was very new, I did remain skeptical, but seeing all the people that have been infected by the virus and even knowing people personally that have been infected, I believe it's very legit, but I don't think we have all the information yet on this virus since it is very new.
Right. And in my book, I have one chapter. It's very short. It's called An Important Disclaimer. And that's a section of the book where I'm talking about the ways they've inflated the death numbers. I do point out that I'm not trying to deny that this thing is an actual illness or that people are actually getting sick and in cases dying from it. Certainly they have. no question about that. Um, I think that your position and my position of some skepticism but not being sure, that has been echoed by a number of experts. I've seen a number of MDs who are now dead against the lockdowns and criticizing the official narrative, who said at first they were accepting it. So many well-informed people took that same position. When this kind of a story breaks, it's kind of like a false flag event. You don't know at first what really went on. Like when Las Vegas happened, the Las
Yes.
Vegas shooting, people would say, "Well, it's fake," and some people would say it's real. Some people would say it's uh, fake and real. But sometimes when news breaks, you can't have an informed position until you get more information.
You got to get the
And I think
facts.
that was
Yeah.
true with the COVID situation. As the news broke, we really weren't sure to make of it. But then, as people like Spiros Skouras came out and exposed Event 201, and we started to see all the predictive programming for this event,
It's a little
how they
weird.
ran, the um, Netflix ran a series called Pandemic in
There's
January.
also the movie Contagion, by the
Yeah,
way.
and there was a Crimson Contagion, a drill for a flu
Right.
coming out of China, and and we've eventually found out that the HR 6666, the Contact Tracing Act, they were actually negotiating the contracts for that months before the COVID outbreak happened. And now it takes time for this information to come out. And so you can't, it's very difficult to take a firm position. But as more information came out confirming that the official narrative was false and it was full of holes, then it was much easier to take a firm position.
Right. And I'm not sure if you saw the film Contagion, but that was a pretty accurate movie there.
Is that the one that came out a few years ago?
Yeah, back in 2011.
I think I did see clips from that
They
on social media.
they even talk about rushing the vaccine, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yes, and in the Netflix documentary Plandemic, which I'm sorry, Pandemic,
Right.
which came out in January, they were talking about the greatest threat is those who refuse to vaccinate. So a lot of ideas being subtly planted in people's minds.
Yes, it's very odd. And of course, James, I know you see the similarities between COVID and 9/11 as we just talked. I see
Mm.
COVID very much like I saw 9/11. It's a bit of a masquerade of sorts. Both, strangely enough, had government intel specifically telling them about the dangers, yet at both instances, the American government didn't really seem to care too much. Am I wrong for saying
Uh,
that, James?
I'm sorry.
Am I wrong for thinking that?
Oh no, there are people have drawn excellent comparisons between 9/11 and this event. In fact, there's a um, former Russian intel officer named Kachkov, and he did an interview on Russian TV
Hmm.
where he drew that specific comparison between 9/11 and the COVID crisis, and said this is a matter of controlling the populations, and he says it's the same people behind it. I thought that was interesting hearing come from the Russian point of view. But many Americans, I saw one article that drew I think about 3 dozen comparisons between 9/11 and this one. But you can see how that increased government control, the security state, the TSA. Now they're saying you can't get on an airline
That's right.
soon without your COVID. So now without a mask, in the future without your immunity passport, and definitely a progression, and something that I think, even though they had these predictors coming out last year, really blindsided us, because I've been running the New World Order since 1985 when I started writing for the New American Magazine. But none of us were really anticipating that this was going to be a medical New World Order.
Hmm. Right.
I suppose we could have picked up the pieces from the Rockefeller Foundation reports and things like that, but I don't really know anybody in alt media who really nailed this one and said, there's a medical lockdown coming.
By the way, James, going back to 9/11, when that
Mhm.
first initially happened, you sort of bought the official narrative, hook, line, and sinker. Is that what you are telling me here, James?
Well, I don't know if hook, line, and sinker, but But yeah, like I said, I was very distracted by many personal issues going on,
You were,
and
yeah,
so
you bought into
in
it though.
fact, the
Yeah,
night
I
before
hear you.
9/11, and the night of September the 10th, 2001, I received some really bad personal news, which I almost didn't sleep the night before. So I was just watching what was going on with the Twin Towers in a daze almost, and
Right, right.
not thinking analytically or critically. And it wasn't until about a year later when a book came out called Stranger Than Fiction, which really laid out all the contradictions in the official narrative, or many of them, I should say, that I said, wow, what a wake up call. It took a while for me, for sure. I was not in a good position to be thinking it through. But I know there are some people who thought this was a false flag right at the beginning. I know some great analysts who said this is impossible. The Twin Towers falling down. That knew on day one this was against the law of physics. But I wasn't thinking it through. No, I kind of bought the narrative at that time. I think.
I think a lot of people did though.
I'm sorry.
I think a lot of people did.
Yeah, yeah. Because again, just we were talking about COVID.
Right.
It takes time for the information to come out. It takes
Right.
time for the critical analysis to come out and people to start talking about, hey, wait a minute, how come Muhammad Atta's bags didn't get on flight 11 and he just happened to include all the plans and the FBI just happened to discover that, that was the only piece of luggage that didn't get on flight 11. And how could a hijacker pilot strike the South Tower at 586 miles per hour when seasoned Boeing pilots tried to do it on a simulator and they couldn't do it at speeds far under that? And why did the Twin Towers turn to dust? I mean, these questions weren't being asked on day one. It took time for people to start analyzing things, just as with COVID. So I think it's understandable. I hope that next time there's a false flag, we'll recognize it on day one. I think we've been hit enough times at this point that we should be. But it does take time to generate critical thinking. Facts.
It takes time. That's true.
It takes time to accumulate those facts.
Right, and I think for those that will be joining us right now and that are listening to this wherever you are, I know this will be replayed later in the network. I must say we are talking about COVID-19 and 9/11. We are sort of making the comparison sort of to a Trojan horse, basically, James. In the sense that it's used for
in both cases.
Right.
It's interesting, the predictive programming that occurred in both of these. We already talked about some of the predictive programming elements that came into COVID, but there were, every 9/11 on social media, I do put about 100 tweets on 9/11, and I run a series of predictive programmings that occurred in Hollywood. And it's amazing some of the things that happened. There was a movie in 1982 with Sean Connery called Wrong is Right. Now, in that movie, the CIA plants 2 suitcase nukes at the Twin Towers, and they fly into the South Tower, and the CIA disarms the nukes on the South Tower at 9:59 in the morning. Well, 9:59 in the morning is the exact moment in the morning when the South Tower actually collapsed. Now, in the movie, they blame the nukes on a Middle Eastern Arab terrorist, and they use it as a pretext for starting wars in the Middle East. And you look back on that, and it's like, that's pretty amazing. I mean, but it's not just that movie. It's quite a few movies
you're right.
that have those kind of elements in them. And there's various explanations for why Hollywood does predictive programming. They're tied into Satanism. I think we're all kind of understand that now. But they say that the reason they put these predictive programmings into Hollywood, and that's just one example. I'm sure you know about the Illuminati card game and so many other examples. But that kind of takes them off the hook in the cosmic scope of things, because it's like they warned us and we didn't pay attention. It wasn't like they completely kept this thing under wraps. And so I think that they think that in their hemisphere that they maybe will be less held accountable for what they did, because they did warn us in this elusive sort of way. I don't know if that's the actual explanation, or maybe they're just trying to taunt us in Hollywood, but you see a lot of that kind of thing happening.
Definitely. And by the way, I must add, the morning of 9/11, I still recall that morning. By
Hmm.
the end of the day there in school, I actually got kicked out of seventh period, I believe. I believe that was seventh period. I raised my hand, James, and I said, if it's possible the government had a hand in this.
Well done. Well done. Well, actually, we've come out now and seen that so many people realize they did have foreknowledge. The the head of the Justice Department, um, his name is going to slip me now, but he, like 2 months before 9/11 happened, he stopped taking commercial airline flights and started flying in private planes. And even the major networks had that story, and they said it was due to a warning from the FBI. And so naturally, the question is, why didn't, if the Justice Department knew something was going to happen, why didn't they warn the public not to fly in commercial airplanes? But yeah, there were a lot of forewarnings. That the government had. They were doing drills where a plane, at least one drill where a plane smashes into the World Trade Center, doing I believe, a total of 46 drills on or near the date of on 9/11 related to terrorist events. Yeah, quite a bit of indications of foreknowledge, and of course, the whole thing about the new Pearl Harbor um, coming out for the
The pamphlet,
yeah, the Project for a New American Century,
correct.
and actually at the graduating class of West Point that spring, um, uh, Paul Wolfowitz gave the talk to the cadets, and he said they had to get ready for they should be looking out for a new Pearl Harbor, and that phrase was being bandied about. There were definitely people in the neocon group who knew this thing was coming.
Yes, it's a very interesting part of history to look back on. And of course, James, you actually stopped writing this 9/11 book. Will that ever see the light of day?
Well, I sure hope so, but I'm concerned right now that given the speed of censorship and the speed of lockdown,
Who knows,
and
right?
the fact that this is happening globally, that unless we turn this thing around, um, we're facing a real, I don't want to say a doomsday scenario, but the last chapter of my book is called Hope and Encouragement. But unless we turn it around, we should be facing very dark times. So I think that my energy right now has to be focused on combating the COVID situation, the lockdowns, the vaccines. I'd love to get back into the 9/11 book, but frankly, despite over 800 pages of material, I was still a long ways from completion, and there were still issues to be resolved. So I don't see that happening soon. I'd love to. It's a favorite topic for me, um, going on in a dark sort of way. But right now, to be sure, what's happening with COVID is our priority.
Yes, I can't believe something like that even happened that long ago. It seems like it was just yesterday, by the way.
Yeah, I guess time flies when you're not having fun.
Definitely. So, yes, as we move along here, most of the latest headlines right now are about the vaccine. And of course, we have seen the vaccine rolled out. Frontline workers have received it. And of course, cases are insanely high right now, James, out here in California. Records are being set every day, it seems. And COVID is really whipping the ass of everyone out here in California, it seems, James.
There's a couple of views on that, and I think the most significant one to mention is that when they talk about cases, they're talking about PCR tests that come back positive. And just to comment on the PCR test,
Yeah, go ahead.
Kerry Mullis was the inventor of the PCR test, and he said it cannot diagnose a disease, it cannot tell you if you're infectious. And Dr. Beta Stadler, a former head of the Institute of Immunology in Bern, Switzerland, pointed out that the PCR test, all it does is it shows some fragments of DNA from the virus, which you may have encountered months ago. They may be totally dead. It does not mean you're infectious. As a matter of fact, here in Boston, I live near Boston, we have a place called the Pine Street Inn. and as a shelter for the homeless. Now, 146 people tested positive for COVID. You know what? Not one of them had any symptoms. I mean, they're all, you'd think that, homeless people should be very vulnerable should to sickness. They don't lead healthy lifestyles, but not one of them had any
Well,
symptoms.
maybe they're
So
immune
that,
to it, all the drugs that they do.
well, oh, or the fact they get out in the sun a lot, and
Or
they
that
need
too.
vitamin D.
Yeah,
But so there have been a tremendous exaggeration as a result of the very questionable PCR tests. The fact you got let me draw some analogies.
sure.
Everybody has some cancer cells in their body,
Right,
but you don't consider cells a cancer victim unless they start to multiply and you become
right.
sick from it. You don't call that a cancer case. Same thing with a flu. You might have a few a flu virus here or there in your body, but unless you're sick with the flu, you don't say that's a case of flu. But they're doing something they haven't done in medicine before. Again, I'm a registered nurse. They're saying that if you test positive, even though you're perfectly healthy, that's a COVID case. Now, having said that, I have heard from a couple of doctors that they are seeing a rise in COVID cases, a significant rise in their hospitals. So I don't want to say that that narrative is totally false. I'm still trying to analyze that. Like I say, I retired from nursing last year. I don't have, and the last place I worked was not an acute care setting. It was, a place where I saw the same residents every day. Last time I worked in an acute care hospital was, let me see, about 2 decades ago. So I don't have that many frontline contacts to keep in touch with, but I try to keep abreast of things as closely as I can. But
Yeah.
but yeah, a lot of it is
Mhm.
exaggeration, that's for sure. Dr. Ron Paul, who himself is a physician, commented on that. That when they started talking about the spike in cases in Texas, they had to have four hospital directors to come back and say, no, we haven't got a spike in cases. One reason the hospitals are busy is because they have a huge backlog of non-COVID things to treat. Cancer cases and um, people with heart conditions and colonoscopies, things they couldn't done. So yeah, they're busy, but it's busy from non-COVID things. But I don't want to deny at this moment in time that there's not a rise in COVID, because I don't know what they're hitting us with. I don't know if they're releasing something new upon us that is actually causing people to get sick with COVID type symptoms.
Yeah, that's also something.
What is your impression in California right now?
Yeah,
Do
that's
you think
also.
that's
Yeah,
yeah?
that's also something you have to keep in mind. We don't exactly know how this is being spread
Mhm.
100%. We do know about droplets and that sort of thing. Maybe if you touch a surface, you could contract the virus that way, but it all depends on the viral load that you are
Right.
exposed to.
Mhm.
But I still think there's probably another way people are being infected that we aren't even aware of yet. That's what I truly believe, James. I could be completely dead wrong, but I still have that strange sort of thought in my head that there might be another way that we don't even know about yet.
Right. That's my gut feeling also. One of the predictors we've talked about, we've mentioned Crimson Contagion and Event 201, um, and the movie Pandemic. Another thing was the World Military Games that took place in Wuhan the month before the outbreak.
That's right.
There were military representatives for 110 countries, and they could have spread it. And uh, if this is a bioweapon, and I'm not saying it is, but there are people like Francis Boyle and Dr. Shiva and Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. They think it's a bioweapon. Luc Montagnier says, based on the given genome, the genetic makeup of the COVID-19 virus, he says it only could be created in a lab. You need molecular tools. That's what he says. I quote him in the book. But if that's the case and it's coming from some kind of military repository, they could just keep spreading it, or, spreading a new variation that they've worked up in a lab. I really don't know exactly what's happening. Of course, there's also the 5G consideration, which 5G they continue to roll it out. COVID didn't slow it down at all. Elon Musk continued to put his satellites up there that are beaming down 5G on us. And if EMFs are impacting our immune systems or affecting us in other ways, it may be one of the explanations. I don't know. I don't want to take a some kind of definite stand. Like one of the problems we had in the 9/11 was that, and I was guilty of this myself. Sometimes you hear a theory and get attached to it and you defend it. I'm trying to stay very open minded. I tried to do this with my 9/11 book that it was in progress. And with COVID too, I try to take into account the different theories and give respect to the different uh, alternatives being proposed, because I don't think it's possible to take an absolute position on this yet. I think that the deep state is up to things that we don't fully understand, but I think it's pretty clear that we know for some time that they're trying to poison us, whether through GMOs, glyphosate, chemtrails, vaccines, you name it. They're certainly trying to take out the human race. We know they're obsessed uh, with population reduction, from Bill Gates to Prince Philip.
Yes, and right now in El Centro, California, where I'm located, apparently the hospitals are a bit overwhelmed. I guess staff is running dry.
Well, they laid off a lot of hospital personnel who are involved in what was called non-essential work. Um, so yeah, this is one of those areas I'm trying to analyze myself. We know that they've done a lot of exaggeration, but they may be um, trying to bring on this second wave in order to justify the lockdowns. Bill Gates loves to cast himself as a prophet, and I'm sure you've heard him say before that, well, this is pandemic one, and now we've got ready to get ready for pandemic two.
Right.
And I don't what they're releasing, whether it's a virus, a new type of poison, or some increase in the EMFs, or some combination thereof. I don't really know. But yeah, that's something I'm trying to get a handle on. I will say this much though: I have no question in my mind that we need to avoid this vaccine.
Right. That's one of the next questions I had for you was in regards to this vaccine. It seems like we are also seeing headlines that healthcare workers are going down. Not that they're dying, but they are having these allergic reactions after receiving a dose of the Pfizer vaccine, by the way.
Right. There were a couple of people up in Alaska had severe reactions, and I'm sure you saw this video of the nurse in Tennessee who fainted
I did.
as she was giving her. Yeah, and there's actually, it's been rumored on social media she might be dead. They're trying to verify this. I've seen nobody on social
Really?
media actually make the definite claim of it, and this may change as we're broadcasting this. Um, but apparently she's not been posting on social media. Well, who knows? That may just because she's lying in a hospital bed recovering. I don't know, but I just want to give you an anecdote. Um, the first time I became suspicious of vaccines was when I was a registered nurse. I was working at a major Boston area hospital, and they made an announcement that on the intercom that there was a all hands on deck meeting at the auditorium, and we're supposed to go in rotating shifts. And I thought, wow, it must be a national emergency. So we got down there, and it turned out that what it was all about was they wanted us to all get the hepatitis B vaccine because it's possible to contract it from infected blood. Well, I immediately saw this as crazy, because the only way you could get it would be if you stuck yourself with a dirty needle that had Hep B on it. And we were using drop boxes. We were used to be in the old days, and back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, we were recapping needles. And when you recapped a needle that you'd stuck in someone, sometimes you'd stick yourself. I did that myself a couple of times.
Oh,
But now we
shit.
had these, yeah, we had drop boxes, and we would just dispose of needles. And on our IVs, we had adapters instead of needles when you plugged a medication into an IV line. So I said, this is kind of crazy. And then they said the housekeepers have to get it. And I said, the housekeepers? Why do the housekeepers need it? They don't even use needles. And they said, well, some lazy nurse might leave an uncapped needle on the bed, and the housekeeper comes in to make the bed, and she sticks herself. And I said, and you want to get 3 injections for that? I said, that's crazy. Well, one of our housekeepers fainted after she got the shot, just like that Tennessee nurse. And I said, this is insane. And I said, I'm signing. I said, I don't want the vaccine. And they said, well, you have to sign waivers. And I said, that's fine. I said, the chance of me getting it, or hepatitis B this way, is nil. I'm not doing it. And at the time, I was not an anti-vaxxer. I didn't know anything about it. But I made a note to myself, there's something wrong going on here. This is illogical. In medicine, we're supposed to do things that are logical and make sense. This did not make sense. And of course, in more recent years, as I've listened to the stories of the parents of autistic children, and I was impacted, I found by myself, by when I was very young by vaccines. I didn't realize it was from the vaccines until I started looking at my medical records. Um, yeah, I eventually became. Now I'd class myself as an anti-vaxxer.
Amazing.
Yeah, not that you. Dr. Rashid Buttar made the point that it's possible that you could make a vaccine that could perhaps enhance your immune response to something, but that's not what happened. They're putting mercury and adjuvants and aluminum and
Damn.
polysorbate 80 and all this aborted fetal cells, and now they got this messenger RNA stuff that's totally experimental. This is wicked stuff right now, and this is genocidal. And many doctors have come out and said so. They're not getting the interviewed on CNN, but they're out there saying it. America's frontline doctors, Simone Gold, so many of them. Dolores Cahill is one of the best. The immunologist. So many doctors out there have spoken out. The one I mentioned today, the 30-year pediatrician who I quoted earlier in the this interview.
It looks like you.
They're speaking out.
It seems like you dodged a bullet, James. Since you are no longer an RN, you probably would have been vaccinated this week.
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm getting a copy of my book ready for my old nursing director. The last place I worked there for 10 years, and I'm sure that her bosses are telling her that the whole staff has to get it. I at least want her to be aware of the information about these, the danger of the vaccine and the responsible scholars and scientists and doctors who are speaking out against it.
Yeah, that's right. You have to consider, of course, your health and how your body will even react to this. Some people have even got, I guess, symptoms of Bell's palsy, apparently, or evidently, rather.
That's correct. 4 people who took the Pfizer vaccine got Bell's palsy, which that paralyzes half of your face, your mouth. You can't blink.
Yeah, let's get vaccinated, James. It sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's not necessary. Again, the survival rate, according to the CDC, is 99.7%. According to that's for everyone, including the elderly. But you look at the young, almost as to date. I want to stress to date, almost no children are affected. In fact, in my updates page, I quote a British newspaper that says that in a slew of data, scientists have not found one case of a child passing this on to an adult, COVID-19. And yet that's the reason the public is given. They say, well, Johnny can't go to school because Johnny might get COVID-19 and pass it on to grandpa. There's not a documented case of that. Now they're using these hypothetical computer models, but science is supposed to be based on observation, not just conjecture.
By the way, we are also learning that it can also be passed through semen, apparently.
I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, there was some strange headline about that.
Yeah, another weird one I saw was yesterday, National Geographic, which, by the way, is owned by Disney. This is what's happened ever since all these, National Geographic used to be an independent magazine, and like the Wall Street Journal used to be independent, but now it's owned by News Corp, one of the big, they're all owned by the big 5, But National Geographic was talking about how maybe you should get more than one. You should get the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. Why not get 2 and build up your immune system? Now, they weren't saying that this was the right thing to do, but they were exploring this. And I'm thinking, is there no end to this obedience to the official story, to this, and is the can you, I haven't I make a lot of memes for Twitter, but I want to make a meme where, have you ever seen the FDA say no
That's
to a vaccine? To a COVID vaccine, I think they're saying yes to everything, although it should be pointed out that
not when there's money to be made, James,
I'm sorry?
I said not when there's money to be made.
Yeah. Well, actually, in my book, COVID-19 and the Agenda to Come, Red Pill, I quote an article that was published in 2018 on all the FDA officials that left the FDA to go work for Big Pharma. Your jaw will drop as you go on the name after name after name of FDA personnel going to AstraZeneca and Moderna and all these other big, Merck and all these other companies to work for them and making these huge salaries. There's a very cozy relationship just as there's between the CDC. Julie Gerberding was head of the CDC from 2002 to 2009. She now works for Merck as head of their vaccine division. And this year, 2020, she sold $9 million worth of stock. You work for the CDC and the FDA, and you approve these big pharma drugs and vaccines. Then you go to work for them, and you make big money. The relationship is cozy. They are not the watchdogs that the public is led to believe.
I'm with you on that one. And you mentioned one of the other vaccines, AstraZeneca from Oxford, I believe.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's true or not, but the claims I read online were that they use clone cells from aborted fetuses. I don't know how true that is. James, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I saw a video by some British nurses, and they were going through the actual box that comes with that vaccine, listing the ingredients, and the ingredients have these numbers which are just Greek to the average person, but they checked out what that meant, and it was from aborted fetal cells, as well as having the M. It seems that all of these COVID vaccines have the mRNA in it. Pfizer's does, Moderna's does, and these are DNA altering vaccines. I should mention that the chief medical officer for Moderna, which is from my state, Massachusetts, or in Cambridge, is named Tal Zaks. He's a former medic with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and he did a TED talk where he boasted that what they're doing at Moderna is hacking the software of life. In other words, they're hacking your DNA, they're changing it, and of course, he's claiming this is all for the good, right? But there's no long-term studies of what the effect of this is, and this is transhumanism, which has been going on for a long time. They know them putting human cells into pigs and other animals and monkeying around with God's creation. It's pretty sickening to see, but that's what we're seeing in all of these. And there are, again, no studies. And Carrie Madej, Dr. Carrie Madej, MD, has been one of the most outspoken ones on this. She points out that once your DNA is altered, if you get sick from that, your doctor is not going to have a remedy. This has never been seen before. There is no remedy. Once you alter your DNA, there's no going back. This is dangerous stuff. And with a survival rate admitted by the CDC of 99.7% for COVID, why would you want to take this risk? And yet this is being mandated. And they're talking about, NBC News talked about this, how in the future, airlines and sports stadiums, they were talking about the NBC piece, will require a vaccine passport.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to happen with grocery stores and places of employment as well.
I said that
makes no sense.
Right.
Makes
I said that was going to happen months ago, and lots of listeners thought I was losing my mind.
Right. It's funny. Somebody made a meme about that. 8 months ago, we said this stuff and people said we're conspiracy theorists.
That's
now we
right.
say, see, it came true. And they say, well, it's for your health,
Yeah, people thought I was full of shit. And I thought, look, just wait. It's only common sense. It's common sense. It's going to happen. Yeah. There's lots of money to be right. There's lots of money to be made on this. This vaccine, what logic is telling me, and the way I'm seeing things play out right now, James, this is going to be an annual shot, just like the flu shot, the annual flu shot that you, I wouldn't say you're required to get, but you're often pushed to get. This is no different. You're going to be having to take a new sort of injection every other couple months or every other year. And to add on to that, you know yourself, James, that the virus has mutated so many times. And just recently, the UK has identified a new COVID-19 strain that seems to spread more quickly this time. And you just have to scratch your head and think, well, since it's mutating, how the hell are we ever going to control this? And as you know, James, only these vaccines are only 50% effective.
Right. Stefano Montanari, who I quote in my book, he's an Italian nanopathologist, says he would have been kicked out of school if he'd suggested a coronavirus vaccine. He pointed out that the coronavirus, which is one of the causes of the common cold, constantly mutates. That's why we never get immune to the common cold, why we keep getting it, and why nobody's ever developed a common cold vaccine. Coronavirus is in that category. And so obviously what's going to happen is, as this thing keeps mutating, or they claim it keeps mutating,
right?
They're going to say, well, that old vaccine you had wasn't enough for the new one. You'll have to get another one to keep up your immunity passport. And they're going to keep altering your DNA with these mRNA vaccines. It is really obviously this was thought out in advance, what they're doing. And this is certainly part of the population control agenda, which we talked about before, that people like Robert McNamara and Zbigniew Brzezinski, Prince Philip, Ted Turner said that we should reduce world population by 95%. That's what they're after. They're after, and this is the way to do it: convince people that they need to take things that will alter their DNA. there was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with. The nephew of President John F. Kennedy is an environmental attorney who's taken a great stand with he heads up the Children's Defense Fund against these vaccines. And he's pointing out the significant dangers that we've never had they tried to make a vaccine for SARS, which is 79% genetically similar to COVID. And they all failed. And the animals in those trials all got extremely sick. Well, they skipped over the animal trials for this one, and they're just injecting it into people. Again, there's no logic behind what they're doing.
I'm glad you mentioned SARS. I forgot all about that, but yes. We couldn't develop a SARS vaccine for 17 years, I believe.
Yeah.
Is my math correct?
What's happening is part of a global political Orwellian lockdown to reduce population, and we're facing really our own destruction. And the censorship, which is unprecedented, is part of that plan. That was played out in Event 201. I have some of the quotes from her in there. Very grateful to Spiros Skouras for exposing that event. Even on their own website, they talk about how this is going to be from a coronavirus coming from bats. I mean, it's an exact prediction. But they talked about shutting down social media and even putting people in prison and facing the courts if they spread quote unquote false information. Well, we know the false information is coming from the top, and it's only the thin line of truth tellers and alt media who stand against this, who are actually thinking critically. All the doctors out there, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, I mentioned others before, Dr. Kerry Madej, Dr. Simone Gold, Dr. Rashid Uttar. I saw a great video. It's on BitChute now, where it runs about a half hour. Each doctor has about a minute, and they have doctor after doctor after doctor saying, "Don't take this vaccine." But there's so many. Vernon Coleman in the UK has been one of the best. Russell Blaylock, Sukrit Bhakti from Germany, eminent microbiologist. Scott Jensen, who's been outspoken about death certificates are being compromised in the U.S. Drs. Erickson Masihi, who had from Bakersfield, California, who tested more people in their region than anybody else, said the chance of dying from COVID in California at that time was 0.03%. They were shut down by YouTube. Dr. Knut Witkowski, eminent epidemiologist, said we're doing this the exact wrong way. Months ago, he said that we should be developing herd immunity like for any other virus instead of shutting people in their homes. And he said we're setting up a second wave that way. He was shut down by YouTube. Dolores Cahill, one of the most eminent immunologists in the world, shut down by YouTube. But yet Bill Gates, who has no medical training, no medical credentials, he gets he has a foundation worth $46 billion. He gets the microphone from all the major networks, and I've never seen one mainstream news anchor or interviewer challenge him on his why is he qualified to tell the world how to respond to COVID.
I don't think you're allowed to ask that question when you bring him on your show.
I don't think so. Not if your news outlet wants to lose the millions of dollars they're getting for the Gates Foundation.
Yeah, it's strange that we do look to him as some sort of authority. Well, I don't think we look to him. He just happened to put himself in that role.
Yeah, and there's so many bad things about Bill Gates, his whole background, the whole sketchy story of how Microsoft actually got started. And, of course, his father was a founding director of Planned Parenthood, the largest provider of abortions. And then he's carried on that mission. As you know, he said with the, among other things, vaccines, we could reduce world population by 10 to 15%. Now, he's logical enough to know that if vaccines are healthy, that would increase world population. So if he's so concerned about the world being overpopulated, why does he invest in vaccines if they really make us healthier and live longer? That doesn't begin to make sense. You'd think he'd be in favor of COVID and not the COVID vaccine. But there's so many bad things he's done. His Gates Foundation has invested in 5.3 million shares of Crown Castle International, which is a major 5G provider. He's invested in 500,000 shares of Monsanto, which produces cancer-causing glyphosate. He's invested in lab-grown meat to replace the meat we eat. He's invested in artificial breast milk, a product called biomilk.
Wow.
He's got a plan to block the sunlight to stop global warming by spraying millions of tons of dust into the atmosphere. He's invested in that. He wants to surround the Earth with surveillance satellites. I mean, everything this guy does is just creeps you out, you know. And yet, of course, he was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, even after Jeffrey Epstein was exposed for the things he was doing in sex trafficking. So many things. I have a whole chapter on Bill Gates in my book. He's the only personality that
He's very into eugenics, just like our friend Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
Very odd. You got to be pretty crazy to be obsessed with eugenics, by the way, James.
Yes, and that goes back to America. Back in the 1930s, we were heavily pushing eugenics in this country. It wasn't just happening in Germany; it was in Britain. In fact, Charles Darwin's son was president of the Eugenics Association in Britain, and in America we had I think it was 30, at least 30 states had passed eugenics laws, and they were passing people who would have seizures, were being targeted for to be sterilized so that they wouldn't pass this on to their offspring. We were obsessed in America with eugenics as well, and finally, fortunately, thank God that movement passed out of vogue.
Right.
But this is what we're seeing today is eugenic, and I have to say that many of the things we see, we don't realize are part of this population reduction plan. Now, many examples: abortion is part of the eugenics plan. Sex robots. It makes people laugh, but that's a way of reducing people can't reproduce.
I talked about that.
Gay marriage,
right? Going back to the sex robots really quickly. It seems like Japan, they are like the prominent leaders of this sort of technology, and it seems like all of this technology comes from Japan. And if you look at statistics out there, very low birth rates.
Yeah, and that's been a problem for much of the world, except a few places like Africa, the low birth rates. But that's one of the things they want. In fact, as you mentioned, that Bill Gates and the World Health Organization supported a vaccine in Africa, which secretly was laced with a sterilizing hormone, a sterilizing formula. It was an anti-HCG, the human HGC, human gonadotropic corner. I'm sorry, I'm gonna probably been talking a little too long here. But HCG is the hormone that allows women to ovulate and create eggs. And the doctors in Africa started getting suspicious because the World Health Organization was pushing this on women of childbearing age in the form of a tetanus vaccine. Now, if you may know that in America, normally we only give a tetanus vaccine once every 10 years. But they were saying you should get 3 tetanus shots to these women of childbearing age. So they got suspicious. They sent it off to independent labs, and every independent lab revealed that it had this sterility formula in it. This was undisclosed. And the very fact that vaccine manufacturers would put undisclosed ingredients into vaccines gives you further pause, I should mention, besides the things we already discussed in tonight's podcast about what's in these vaccines. There may be undisclosed ingredients as well.
Absolutely.
Things designed because they are obsessed with population reduction in formulas to make women have the inability to ovulate. This would be a definite thing to be on guard for. And anyway, I would just make a blanket statement: don't take the vaccine.
Yeah.
There's so many negatives at this point.
You just really don't know what you're putting into your system, and they're not going to tell you either.
Right. And I should also mention that none of these vaccines, including the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, have been approved by the FDA. The FDA has simply given them emergency authorization during the COVID or so-called COVID crisis.
Right. And James, I know we talked about the death rate being a very small %, but you really don't know what this is going to do to your immune system later down the road. very much like the vaccine.
You mean the COVID or the vaccine?
Both. You just don't know what this is going to do to you.
Well, the vaccine, that's especially true because mRNA vaccines have never been used on humans before. They are DNA altering, even if it may seem minor. You know, if you go to sorry, I'm just going to blank out here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to think of a certain genetic disease. It's just I'm probably going a little too long tonight to remember it.
It's all right.
I'll pass on it until I remember the name. I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
There's a genetic disease that involves hemoglobin, and you get the disease if one of about 300 amino acids, you get the wrong amino acid, that will give you the disease. And then the point I want to make is that it takes a very tiny alteration in your DNA to generate a genetic disease. Just one amino acid in the wrong place can do it. Not necessarily some substitutions of an amino acid can be harmless, but sometimes just one alteration will give you a significant disease. So playing around with your DNA like Moderna and Pfizer are doing right now with these vaccines is an extremely dangerous proposition.
Yes, everyone wants to play God, as you know. And speaking of which, here is Bill Gates from that TED Talk many, many moons ago. James, are you ready to hear this?
Oh, sure.
Here we go.
When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. That's why we had a barrel like this down in our basement filled with cans of food and water. When the nuclear attack came, we were supposed to go downstairs, hunker down, and eat out of that barrel. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence. But we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic. Let's look at Ebola. I'm sure all of you read about it in the newspaper. Lots of tough challenges. I followed it carefully through the case analysis tools we use to track polio eradication. And as you look at what went on, the problem wasn't that there was a system that didn't work well enough. The problem was that we didn't have a system at all. In fact, there are some pretty obvious key missing pieces. We didn't have a group of epidemiologists ready to go who would have gone, seen what the disease was, see how far it had spread. The case reports came in on paper. It was very delayed before they were put online, and they were extremely inaccurate. We didn't have a medical team ready to go. We didn't have a way of preparing people. Now, Médecins Sans Frontières did a great job orchestrating volunteers, but even so, we were far slower than we should have been getting the thousands of workers into these countries. And a large epidemic would require us to have hundreds of thousands of workers. There was no one there to look at treatment approaches, no one to look at the diagnostics, no one to figure out what tools should be used. As an example, we could have taken the blood of survivors, processed it, and put that plasma back in people to protect them. But that was never tried. So there was a lot that was missing, and these things are really a global failure. The WHO is funded to monitor epidemics, but not to do these things I talked about. Now in the movies, quite different. There's a group of handsome epidemiologists ready to go. They move in, they save the day, but that's just pure Hollywood. The failure to prepare could allow the next epidemic to be dramatically more devastating than Ebola. Let's look at the progression of Ebola over this year. About 10,000 people died, and nearly all were in the 3 West African countries. There's 3 reasons why it didn't spread more. The first is there was a lot of heroic work by the health workers. They found the people and they prevented more infections. The second is the nature of the virus. Ebola does not spread through the air. And by the time you're contagious, most people are so sick that they're bedridden. Third, it didn't get into many urban areas, and that was just luck. If it had gotten into a lot more urban areas, the case numbers would have been much larger. The next time we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. In fact, let's look at a model of a virus spread through the air like the Spanish flu back in 1918.
By the way, this is almost over, James. This audio clip here, it's a lot different when you hear it now, isn't it? Oh, did we lose James? Oh, there he is.
Yeah, I had not heard that specific clip before, or maybe it was part of a talk that I'd heard part of before, but didn't hear that section, not to my recollection.
Oh my. All right, let's continue playing this. We are almost done here with this clip. Pretty interesting so far.
So here's what would happen. It would spread throughout the world very, very quickly. And you can see there's over 30 million people die from that epidemic. So this is a serious problem. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system. We have the benefits of all the science and technology that we talk about here. We've got cell phones to get information from the public and get information out to them. We have satellite maps where we can see where people are and where they're moving. We have advances in biology that should dramatically change the turnaround time to look at a pathogen and be able to make drugs and vaccines that fit for that pathogen. So we can have tools, but those tools need to be put into an overall global health system, and we need preparedness. The best lessons, I think, on how to get prepared are, again, what we do for war. For soldiers, we have full-time waiting to go. We have reserves that can scale us up to large numbers. NATO has a mobile unit that can deploy very rapidly. NATO does a lot of war games to check, are people well-trained? Do they understand about fuel and logistics and the same radio frequencies? So they are absolutely ready to go. So those are the kinds of things we need to deal with an epidemic. What are the key pieces? First is we need strong health systems in poor countries. That's where mothers can give birth safely, kids can get all their vaccines, but also where we'll see the outbreak.
All right, I think we got enough of Mr. Bill Gates for one evening here. And the other sider in the chat says, is the vax going to be mandatory? And my goodness, you haven't been paying attention, have you? Of course, this will be some sort of requirement to enter access to certain buildings or certain events, Ticketmaster, football games, maybe even your own workplace, depending on what you do for a living. If you are a nurse or a doctor, you probably would have been vaccinated already. James, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for playing that clip. I had not actually heard that specific clip. Perhaps I heard part of the presentation previously, but that specific clip I had not heard before.
Right. Very interesting. In hindsight, listening back to what Bill was saying, and it's pretty wild. It's almost like he knew what was going to happen, right?
Right. Well, he did predict we'd have to look out for a pandemic. And remember, with the funding of the Gates Foundation as well as the World Economic Forum, this event 201 took place last year. Now, in that clip you played, Gates was saying that we need to be like the military. We need to be have exercises and be prepared for
Right.
pandemics. And so, of course, Event 201 with his funding was just that. And of course, it was highly specific, and it recommended censoring quote unquote fake news. So it appears that he's following his own advice. And of course, when you have $46 billion to play with, it's very easy to implement your vision.
Correct. And what are your thoughts and opinions on one Dr. Fauci?
Next to Bill Gates, I think I've done more memes on Fauci for Twitter than
That's funny.
anybody else. Fauci is, if you read Dr. Judy Mikovich's book, Plague of Corruption, she talks in there, or watch the movie Plandemic, she talks about Fauci's personal corruption. It goes back for decades. He seems to be a man who likes to play both sides of the fence. He's certainly playing Big Pharma's side, but
Right.
he will say you need a mask. You'll find clips of Fauci saying you need a mask, you don't need a mask. Symptomatic carriers are dangerous. Asymptomatic carriers are dangerous. He will make statements that basically enable him to go back and say, you see, I told you so, because he'll take either side on a particular issue. But I just saw a clip today where he said that he went to the North. He was talking to some children on CNN, saying he went to the North Pole and vaccinated Santa Claus. He's definitely aligned with Bill Gates.
Oh, shit.
Going back for many decades. He is definitely a corrupt individual. Should not be entrusted. Actually, I saw a clip that was discovered and put onto social media the other day of Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test. And in that clip, he talks extensively about Dr. Fauci. One of the things he says is Dr. Fauci doesn't know anything about anything. That's coming from the inventor of the PCR test, which Fauci is now using as the rationale for quarantining people. So Fauci is definitely part of the corrupt part of the medical establishment.
Yes, and you are correct on your assessment there. Dr. Fauci did say some odd things very early on about the masks. Let's play that clip now.
Reason to be walking around with a mask.
Ooh.
When you're
Let me replay that here for you.
right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course.
Oy
But when
vey.
you think masks, you should think of healthcare providers needing them.
And yes, but that was very early in the game.
Right. And he's changed his tune now. He says that
Right.
you need to mask up. Although it's interesting, if you watch that ball game that he threw the first pitch out on, he was in the
Yes.
stands with his mask down and not observing social distancing.
Very interesting. Yes, he definitely was not wearing the mask when he was out there and during that event. And by the way, I must ask you, James, do you feel that the Trump administration handled the pandemic properly, in your opinion?
No, not when you have Trump establishing Operation Warp Speed at the White House, and then they hired the man to run it. They drew on one of the board directors of Moderna, Moncef Slaoui. Obvious conflict of interest there. We now see Moderna being approved to give out their version of the COVID vaccine. That's, by the way, Moderna has never brought a product to market before. They've never succeeded at doing that, unless you want to call this experimental vaccine a success in terms of getting it actually into people's arms. But I have to say that I'm more concerned about a Biden administration, certainly, than a Trump administration, even though Trump has been very, Trump has given us mixed signals on this, don't you think? I mean, on the one hand, he approved Operation Warp Speed. On the other hand, he did praise hydroxychloroquine, and he also defunded, from a U.S. standpoint, the World Health Organization. Although some people say, well, he simply put that into Gavi, which is a Bill Gates creation.
He also likes 5G very much, James.
I'm sorry?
He likes 5G a lot, too.
Right. So I can't give Donald Trump a clean bill of health on the situation with COVID, but frankly, I am more concerned about what this country would descend to.
Understood.
Under a Biden administration. As you know, Joe Biden is in the early stages of dementia, and it'll be somebody else calling the shots. It won't be Joe Biden, and I'm afraid that we might really descend into communism if a Biden administration does indeed get inaugurated into the White House.
For sure. And I want to bring it back around here to our guy, the big guy, Joe Biden, in a moment here. But earlier this year, we all heard the Bob Woodward audio. And for those that don't know, that was pretty interesting. We could play a few moments of that if you'd like, as a refresher, just a few seconds here, James. And I think you recall this audio, right?
I'm not sure which one you're talking about, so go ahead and play it.
Let it roll.
Tonight, new reporting from the Washington Post's Bob Woodward says that President Trump was bluntly warned in January about the threat of coronavirus, but chose to downplay the danger in public. Woodward's new book, Rage, is his latest work in a 50-year career investigating American presidents. His first investigation, reported with Carl Bernstein, led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. For Rage, Mr. Trump agreed to 18 recorded interviews. Many, which you're about to hear, started with the words of the White House operator. Mr. Woodward, the president, Mr. Trump called sometimes late at night to talk about Black Lives Matter, the threat of nuclear war, and about the dire warning he received during an intelligence briefing this past January.
The story will continue in a moment.
On January 28th of this year, before the virus was on anyone's radar, the National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien told the president, this virus will be the biggest national security threat you face in your presidency.
What was the president's reaction?
His head popped up and he asked questions.
President Trump's questions in the January 28th meeting exposed a difference of opinion. Beth Sanner from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said the virus might be no worse than SARS in 2003, when there were only 8 known infections in the U.S. But Woodward says Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger, who had been a reporter in China, told Mr. Trump his unofficial Chinese contacts had raised a grave warning.
Pottinger said his contacts in China told him this is going to be like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that killed 675,000 people in this country. It was a stunning moment in the Trump presidency, and I think in American history, because he then went on to publicly dismiss the virus, and he knew that this was a pandemic coming.
And this is January 28th.
Yes.
The next day, the White House announced a coronavirus task force. This was Mr. Trump January 30th, 2 days after the warning.
We think we have it very well under control. We have very little problem in this country at this moment, 5, and those people are all recuperating successfully. But we're working very closely with China and other countries, and we think it's going to have a very good ending for us. So that I can assure you.
Chinese officials were concealing what they knew about COVID-19.
Foreign nationals.
On January 31st, the president restricted travel from China. The next week, in a phone call, Mr. Trump told Woodward what he'd been learning about the virus. This was February 7th.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flu. This is deadly stuff.
3 weeks after that call, the president said this to the public.
It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for. and we'll essentially have a flu shot for this in a fairly quick manner. Yeah, go ahead.
In that February 7th interview, it's clear that the president knows what the stakes are, but he's not sharing that with the public at that time.
Yes, this is the tragedy. A president of the United States has a duty to warn. The public will understand that, but if they get the feeling that they're not getting the truth, then you're going down the path of deceit and cover.
Did the president ever disclose to you why he wasn't telling the public what the stakes were with the coronavirus?
So in March, I asked exactly that question, what's going on? And the president said,
well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
I think he did not understand the American public. And he said, well, I don't want to create a panic. We know from history, when the public is told the truth, they organize, we have a problem, we're going to step up. And Trump thought, oh, well, they'll panic when there's a crisis, when the president particularly knows something, it's time to tell the public in some. He failed.
You write in the book that the president's handling of the virus reflects his instincts, habits, and style. What are those?
Denial, making up his own facts.
At age 77, Bob Woodward has fact-checked 9 presidents. Rage is his 20th book. It's published by Simon & Schuster, part of Viacom CBS.
The title Rage comes from him.
All right. And after hearing that, what are your thoughts on the audio there of Bob Woodward and President Donald Trump?
Michael, I have to say that
Go ahead.
There's been a coordinated effort to dislodge President Trump from the White House. We've seen tremendous evidence of vote fraud in the past election, and it seems that the deep state is very determined to put Joe Biden into the White House, where he can be managed very easily by people behind the scenes. This seems to me nothing more than part of that. Bob Woodward, if he's talking about truth, shows no understanding or acknowledgement of the destruction of the lockdown. I should mention also that Trump did lock down on March the 13th, just not all that far after what Woodward is talking about. He did take action, and he may not have been given full advice, as you pointed out, from the Chinese. By the way, in China right now, in Wuhan, they're gathering
they're
socially,
partying,
and they're not wearing masks.
They're having a good time.
They're partying in Wuhan right now. So what's going on with us in America? That there's a lot of contradictions here. But Bob Woodward is not showing any sense of reality of what is going on with COVID. He's following the mainstream narrative, which exaggerated so many times over the reality of COVID. He's not demonstrating any critical thinking that I can see, but he's simply acting as part of the propaganda machine that intends to bring about a Democratic administration. So I don't attach a lot of significance to what he says there.
Max Cole in the chat room, one of the listeners here, he's asking, the question is, what do you think of the lack of transparency from the president? That's what he's asking. I think he's asking you that.
Did he have the full facts? And as
we don't know. Yeah,
COVID was not as bad as the press has made it out to be. We know this from many doctors, and to the degree that Trump also said that COVID was not as bad as the official story was, I don't think we can say that he was being unforthcoming with the public in trying to conceal the dangers, because in fact the dangers have been greatly exaggerated. I don't have a problem. I was glad when he recommended hydroxychloroquine, but on the other hand, very disappointed when he authorized Operation Warp Speed for this completely destructive and unnecessary COVID vaccine.
It's a little iffy though when he's saying that he's downplaying the virus. That's I don't know what to tell you. I don't like the sound of that very much, though.
Well, I don't like the sound of the word downplay, but the fact is that I downplay it as well, but with good reason, because we know that the CDC, and this happened abroad as well in many other countries, has grossly exaggerated the COVID pandemic by encouraging doctors to falsify death certificates. And I can give you exact quotes from the CDC itself on that. Let me just
go for it.
Okay, CDC says, quote, in cases where a definite diagnosis of COVID cannot be made, but is suspected or likely, it is acceptable to report COVID-19 on a death certificate as probable or presumed. And the National Vital Statistics System, which is part of the CDC, says, quote, COVID-19 should be reported on the death certificate for all descendants with the disease is caused or is assumed to have caused or contributed to death. So the CDC is counting people who die of cancer, heart disease, lung disease, pneumonia, if they happen to test positive, which again is a very questionable test. Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the PCR test, would acknowledge that. The CDC is exaggerating the death rate. So I don't think we can criticize President Trump for downplaying the virus when the CDC upplayed the virus. I just don't, that doesn't register with me.
My only problem is he allegedly told the truth about so many other things. I just think, why didn't he just tell the truth about this? Who cares? Just throw it out there.
Tell the truth specifically about what?
About the virus, about what you know. I just think you should have told the American public the truth of the matter. That's all.
Well, if in fact this is being spread by the deep state hired force, if it's, for example, a military bioweapon, or if it's being deployed by 5G, it may even involve elements that the president himself was not aware of. I don't, as much as I was disappointed by Trump's allegiance to Netanyahu, and
he got vaccinated, by the way, Benjamin Netanyahu, just today,
supposedly,
allegedly.
A lot of these public vaccinations are suspect. We've seen a number of cases where, I'm a nurse. In order to inject someone, you have to draw the medicine into the syringe. You have to draw back the plunger, and then you have to push the plunger in to the and when you insert the needle in, we've seen people where they don't move the plunger when they're supposedly getting vaccinated. We've seen people who've been vaccinated with the cap on the needle, which is impossible. Now, Netanyahu, they did plunge the needle, but I have to just point out that doesn't mean it had the vaccine inside. There could be sterile saline or anything. Morphine, who knows? It could be anything inside that. So these are done to persuade the public. I know that several former U.S. presidents have said they're going to go on television to show themselves getting the shot. It doesn't mean a thing to me. We've been deceived too many times.
Yes, and that's exactly my issue with all of this. The fact that we've been deceived so many times. I just thought, my God, we finally have a president who will tell you the truth and how it is. Yet we didn't really get that in this time around in regards to the virus.
Well, if he was telling us the truth, he'd be telling us the same things that Dr. Vernon Coleman, Dr. Simone Gold, and other truth tellers are telling us, that the lockdown is not necessary, that it is causing far more harm to people by suppression of diagnosis of heart and cancer conditions, that is throwing, according to Reuters, there are 28 million Americans that are threatened with becoming homeless because they can't pay their rent or their mortgages. Right. Why isn't he talking about that? Alt media is talking about that. Why isn't the president? My disappointment is not with him downplaying the virus, but his failure to address the destructiveness of the lockdowns. That to me is where the greatest danger lies.
Right, and I don't really agree with the lockdowns either. It's something I have to live with, however. I get denied service if I'm not wearing a mask. Nothing I want to do, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, like I say, for me, the business of Trump is a non-starter. I see on mainstream media that Trump is attacked every day. That's been going on for months, before the election. If you look at, for example, America Online, every day they would run headlines denouncing Trump openly. This is not the way the news media used to act. They used to try to carry a balance. When Obama was president, you might see at the most one slightly negative headline about Obama. They've been trying to dislodge this guy. It's not so much, I don't think it's so much Trump that they hate as his followers, his supporters, his deplorables, the people who are constitutionalists, the people who defend civil liberties, the people who are pro-Second Amendment. They want to target those people, and they seem to be determined to have a Biden administration come in that will disarm Americans and proceed with a totalitarian socialist type of state. To me, the remarks by the author were Bob Woodward were unimportant. If you look back at Nixon, what Nixon's crimes were so mild compared to people's sense that Nixon won the 1972 election by a landslide. He won 49 out of 50 states. The Watergate break-in was not something that there's any evidence that he authorized. He certainly didn't need it to win that election. The Watergate break-in was done like it was done by Laurel and Hardy. Henry Kissinger, who authorized it, was never, ever mentioned in the Watergate proceedings. It was Nixon and his palace guard that they got rid of, and then they planted Nelson Rockefeller as vice president behind Gerald Ford. You had an unelected president and an unelected vice president after they got rid of Nixon and Agnew, who had legitimately won. And Bob Woodward was part of that whole scam. And I don't put any confidence in what he's saying about Trump. He's got his own agenda, which is part of the establishment deep state agenda. Sorry, I'm not buying that he's a rebel against the establishment. He's part of it.
I was just going to ask, do you think that was a part of some sort of smear campaign on his behalf?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Trump has his faults, and I've written about those on my website. I've criticized his bombing of Syria twice on unverified reports of chemical weapons used by Assad. I've bitterly criticized Trump, but they definitely seem to be wanting to make a move towards a Democrat administration. It seems they are determined to implant Joe Biden in the White House, who again will be run by other people and probably will not last more than a couple of months because of his obvious onset of dementia. He'll be replaced by Harris, and then Harris will appoint an unelected vice president who might then become the unelected president if something happens with Harris. So, I don't see Woodward's remarks as having any force. They're just part of the overall panorama of attacks on Trump.
And by the way, since we are almost at a close here and we are talking about, well, you just mentioned Joe Biden. Your thoughts and reactions when you first heard the news that he would become our next president?
Well, I know that some people are holding out hope that is not going to happen. There's been talk of, I certainly think there's very valid evidence of
voter fraud. Okay.
The Dominion machines,
Mm-hmm.
the dumping of thousands and thousands of Biden votes in Michigan late at night, the whistleblowers that have come forward, refusal to have monitors watch the vote counting process. So much evidence that needs to be investigated. And remember all the calls for investigation of Trump's victory, the Russian collusion and the recounts that were called for, and the attempts by Soros to bribe electors even. I mean, remember that happening in 2016. So that all seems to be being pushed aside. The media is crowning Biden the winner. We're not seeing any real help from the Justice Department. Maybe something amazing is going to happen, but I kind of feel that Trump followers are perhaps being misled into this mistaken belief of, just trust the plan and, this is all going to work out and Trump's still going to stay president and drain the swamp. I'm not that confident. I'd like to believe that something like that might happen because as critical as I have been of Trump, I am far more concerned about a Biden presidency where his mental state is so unpredictable, and the swamp creatures that he's, Janet Yellen and John Kerry and other, other people that he's recruiting or being told to recruit for his administration. That is far more worrisome to me. But I have a feeling they are going to try and push that forward. What are your thoughts, Michael? What did you think about the announcement of Biden?
I couldn't even believe it. I thought Donald Trump was going to win this one by a landslide, in my opinion.
I think he did.
I'm shocked by the results, to be honest with you, and I didn't even vote for Joe Biden. Some people thought I did, because people have the perception that I hate Donald Trump, and I think that's pretty ridiculous. I've been pretty clear. I've been diaphanously clear on how I feel about Donald Trump, and I don't hate the guy. I've always explained that, but some people get these wild ideas for whatever reason. But he did what he could, and now it seems like he lost. So I don't really know what else to say. I mean, some people are claiming that there was voter fraud, and I waited till that went to court, and well, that was thrown out. So now I'm just left thinking, well, what the hell just happened? But of course, I'm in the minority. I'm not sure if a lot of people feel that way. Lots of people are angry, though. Lots of people want some sort of they're pushing for a civil war. I don't really understand why anybody would want that. You really don't want that. Trust me. You don't really want a civil war. That's ridiculous. But I'm sure you heard the same sentiments before, James.
Regarding a civil war?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Well,
Good Lord.
Whether Trump stayed in or not, we'd be facing a very bad situation. If Trump was to somehow stay in, that the Antifa and Black Lives Matter would be out causing the same kind of destruction they did after the George Floyd incident. They've already been convinced by the media that Biden won. On the other hand, if Biden wins, or I should say, if he's inaugurated, then we will see a descent into very totalitarian measures, gun control, and the kind of society we really don't want to live in. But civil war is not a very good alternative either, which we would certainly get in the event of Trump retaining his office. The violence would be extreme. So I don't see a very good outcome for America in either case.
Either way, you think we're pretty much screwed.
Well, that's a pretty neat way of summing it up.
I hear you. These are very odd times, no doubt, and I'm sure lots of people are confused. Lots of people are wondering if they'll ever vote again. That's for sure. Many people are questioning the American dream, it seems like. James?
Very justifiably. In fact, that disillusionment with the voting system, it goes way back. You can certainly cite the 2012 Republican GOP convention where Mitt Romney took it away from Ron Paul. Ron Paul had won enough primaries to win a floor nomination, but they simply voted at the delegation. The delegations voted at the GOP convention to increase the number of states necessary to get a nomination.
My goodness.
So to cut Ron Paul out. I mean, a lot of people said, I'm never voting again after that. So this goes way back, the disillusionment, and certainly the voter fraud, and the fact that it's so easy to tamper with electronic voting, just by embedding a code in there that nobody can recognize in order to change the votes around. Who can trust such a system? I prefer the old-fashioned paper ballots where you have Republicans and Democrats overseeing the counting of the paper ballots. Even though that takes longer, it's slower, it's a much fairer system.
Understood. And James, as we wrap it up here tonight, I do want to thank you tremendously for being a part of the program. But before I do let you go, is there anything else you feel like we didn't exactly address at all? Anything that we might have left out here tonight? The floor is yours. If you don't have anything to add, go ahead and plug your book or anything you'd like, James. Go ahead.
Well, I did want to mention in regard to my book.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted people to know that the night before I was going to upload a Amazon Kindle version, a digital version. They censored it, and I have made that digital version freely available on my website, jamesperloff.com. And it's in 3 formats: EPUB, which is a very popular digital format; Mobi, which works on a Kindle; and the most popular one is PDF. And even the PDF has all clickable hyperlinks. So if you go to, before I made this book, this digital book, I went through every endnote, every hyperlink, and make sure it was working. Now, you can be sure that there's a video here and there that's been censored since I made it, but I'd say that 98% of them are still working. And if you do contact me on my website, I've been contacted by people around the world, including health professionals, doctors, and nurses, say they can't get the book in their own company, in their own country. I did mention earlier tonight, very early in the show, that Book Depository in the UK is now offering to ship my book, the paperback version, for free anywhere in the world. But if you contact me on my website, you can get a free ebook in the version of your choosing. And the advantage of an ebook, of course, is you can click on the hyperlink and instantly verify the source material. So that's out there. My second printing is done. The book is available in bookstores. It's not on Amazon, but it's in Barnes & Noble, Powell Books, Books A Million, and your local bookstore. So I just want to make sure that people are aware that it's out there. Again, the title is COVID-19 and the Agendas to Come, Red Pilled, and it's got 27 chapters covering everything, including the lockdowns' impact on health, the economy, civil liberties. I have many doctors quoted on whether lockdowns are unnecessary. I have a chapter on masks and social distancing. I have a chapter on the whole the business of the panic. I have a chapter on COVID-19 compared to other pandemics where we didn't lock down that were worse. How they've inflated chapters on how various ways they've inflated the death rates. A chapter on the accuracy of testing. I have a whole section on the theories about COVID-19, whether it's a bioweapon, 5G, Zach Bush's take, Stephanie Seneff's take, Andrew Coffin's take. I have a section on the deep state's endgame, including chapters on population reduction, Bill Gates, global vaccines, one on hydroxychloroquine, another one called 8 Reasons Why We Don't Need a COVID Vaccine, one on a global ID, one on the cashless society, one on contact tracing and the surveillance state. But I try to end off on a note of hope. I talk about, the Bible doesn't end with the Antichrist, it ends with Christ. And I talk about the doctors and the attorneys and the mass demonstrations against these lockdowns that are occurring. There are so many signs of a global awakening taking place. I try to end the book on a very strong note of encouragement. But again, that book is available for free from my website in 3 different digital forms, and is now available internationally in paperback form.
Oh, by the way, James, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think we covered the mask at all, really, too much here. Are you anti-mask?
Sure. As we discussed earlier, the COVID-19 virus is so small you have to visualize parts of it through an electron microscope. That'll go right through a mask. And wearing a mask, it's been demonstrated scientifically, reduces your oxygen intake to 17 to 18% atmospherically, whereas according to the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, it's illegal to someone to work in an environment where the oxygen level is less than 19.5% atmospherically. So when you wear a mask all day, you're violating OSHA standards. I think that our governors should be made aware of that. But masks actually cause people to rebreathe toxins and bacteria, and in the long run will make people sick. And there are many examples of that happening. We've had people die from wearing masks. We've had people crashing into telephone poles on the highway because they rebreathed too much of their carbon dioxide. This is not the way to go. The science behind it is non-existent. And I quote many, many doctors to this effect, citing many, many scientific studies. The same goes with social distancing. Doctors Jefferson and Hennigan of Oxford University looked at 172 studies relevant to social distancing and could not find one that justified this 6 but rule. And I quote many of
Amazing.
the doctors to that effect. So yes, I'm dead against social
Yeah,
distancing.
you're very
and masks for healthy people.
right.
If you have tuberculosis, that's a different story. If you're really sick, if you have the flu, sure, quarantine yourself till your fever goes down. The way we've always done it, rest and chicken soup until you're getting better. But to quarantine the healthy and to make them not go to work or be able to travel, to quarantine them for 14 days because of a highly questionable PCR test, which Kerry Mullis, the inventor of the test, said could not diagnose any disease, is disastrous. The economic, civil liberties, and health consequences of the lockdowns are so much more disturbing than COVID itself.
I'm not an anti-masker, by the way, just for the record. I don't think every mask works, however. I don't think every mask is created equal at all.
Right.
Yeah, so I definitely do think the mask does work, but I think it just depends which one you're wearing. If you're wearing one of those really cheap, shitty ones, then yeah, that shit isn't going to work. No doubt. That's just where I stand. I'm no doctor, obviously, but I'm someone who doesn't want to get sick at all. I don't want your flu, even if it's something small. I don't like any of that shit. I don't like getting sick, period. So, if I have to wear a mask, I guess I'll have to. But I definitely think that, if we have to wear a mask, then goddamn, we are forced to do so. I mean, we're not going to turn this into a Waco situation now, are we, James?
Well, the problem with the masks, besides the detriment to our health, is that they're setting us up for the vaccine passports. Right now, you can't buy or sell. You can't go into a grocery store in most states, unless maybe South Dakota you can, but most states you can't go into a store without a mask, and it's going to be a pretty easy step for them to say you can't get into a store unless you've got your vaccine passport. And that will really put people under the bus as far as vaccines go. I don't think they're going to try and break down doors to give people vaccines now with over 70 million gun owners in America. That'll be pretty dangerous. But they can do it by making it impossible to travel, go to the hospital, go to work, or go shopping without digital certificate of immunity, which Bill Gates, by the way, has talked about going way back. So yeah, definitely a concern. The masks are leading us into that other form of more advanced submission.
I don't even like people, so I don't even care about being around anyone. I think it's great. I'm just like, good social distancing. I like that. Stay away from me. And yes, Lilith in the chat, survival of the fittest. Yes, I love Darwin. That is true. So if I could get away from all of you sick bastards out there, I will. No doubt. I know that's not the way everyone thinks, but that's just how I feel, and those are my opinions. But James, I do want to thank you tremendously for being a part of the program again. It was an honor and pleasure to have you here. It was such a fun time with you.
Well, thanks. Well, we've covered a lot of topics and some areas that I didn't know we'd go into, and you played some clips that I hadn't heard before too. So thank you for that. That's been added to my own information bank as to what's been taking place. But thank you, Michael, for having me back on. And
yes,
sir. A short amount of time. This is actually the first interview I've done since the second printing of my book came in this week. And I'm just delighted to have an opportunity to talk a little about the book as well as what is going on in the world around us, which is obviously crucial and significant at this juncture of history.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, James. We will talk again. You can find his work over at jamesperloff.com. James, once again, it was fun. We will do it again on the other side. Take care.
Okay, Michael. Thank you. You take care.
Take care, brother.
And their audience.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And there he goes, boys and girls. That was the one and only James Perloff. Yes, indeed, that was fun. And there he goes, boys and girls. I forgot to unmute myself there. And I do want to thank all of you out there for being a part of the program yet again. Those of you in the chat room, it's like you were here with me the entire time. Like if you were in the room. I'm pretending that you were in the room, so I don't feel so lonely sitting here all alone in the dark. Once again, thank you. Those of you who will listen back on the podcast rendition of this program, You can catch the replay over at iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox, Spotify, and there's a few others. But yes, if you enjoyed tonight's show, please direct yourself to patreon.com/Michael Decon. And yes, that's where you will find bonus content. And of course, international listeners out there, thank you so much for your support. I see you out there. It was an interesting night yet again, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't worry. Yes, oh, you know what? Thank you, Jesus. That reminds me. We didn't get to this part here. We forgot all about this. We forgot about Paula White. How can we do this?
And strike 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 until you have victory. For every enemy that is aligned against you, let there be that we would strike the ground, for you will give us victory, God. I hear a sound of abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory.
Oh my.
I hear a sound of shouting and singing. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done. For I hear victory, 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 victory in the corridors of heaven. In the corridors of heaven, victory, 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 victory. For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. Hamanda aka ata raka teda baka sanda ata ambo osa kata rite eke banda ata rike didi ashata. For angels have even been dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now. Africa right now. From Africa right now. They're coming here. They're coming here. In the name of Jesus. From South America. They're coming here. They're coming here. They're coming here. They're coming here. From Africa. From South America. Angelic forces. Angelic reinforcement. Angelic reinforcement. Angelic reinforcement. Pika hata anda ata. Ora bata rata ande eke eke manda rasata. For I hear the sound of victory. 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 I hear the sound of victory.
Holy shit. This bitch is crazy. No doubt. Almost as crazy as Tom Cruise in his Scientology, but, you know, probably not as crazy as Paula White. And for those that don't know, yes, Tom Cruise back in the media who recently went crazy with some sort of outburst. It was pretty epic. Let's play that audio before we wrap it up here tonight. Yes, this comes from Mr. Tom Cruise.
You're back here in Hollywood making movies right now because of us! Because they believe in us and what we're doing!
Oh
I'm on the phone with every studio at night. Insurance companies. Producers. And they're looking at us and using us to make their movies. We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever.
That's right.
And if you don't do it, you're fired. And
That's
I
right.
see you do it again, you're gone.
You're fucking fired.
And anyone on this crew does it. That's it. And you too. And you too. And you.
That's right. Fire them.
Ever do it again.
Yeah, fuck them. Fire their ass.
That's it.
Get them out of there.
No apologies. You can tell it to the people that are losing their homes.
Love Tom Cruise. I want him to yell more.
Because our industry is shut down. It's not going to put food on their table or pay for their college education. That's what I sleep with every night. The future of this industry.
Good God. Tom Cruise is also nuts. Yes, everyone is losing their minds. It's been a fun 2020, I would say. It's been a cursed year. It's been a rather revealing time. Everyone has sort of shown their cards. Truly. Well, once again, I do want to thank all of you out there for hanging out with me tonight. It was another classic. It was certainly fun. Lots of joy, lots of anger, lots of tears. It's one of those nights. Once again, I do want to thank all of you out there for hanging out. We will do this again on the other side. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, mahalo.